Ethan had been watching Madison change day by day, and the shift in her behavior felt colder than any winter he had ever known. She stopped asking about his day and started asking about bank balances. She no longer cared whether he slept well, only whether his insurance policies were updated. The final blow came when Ethan discovered she had secretly inherited $400,000, yet acted as if every cent in their home belonged solely to her. The more he observed, the more he felt she was studying him, not with love but with calculation. So he turned to his closest friend, Dr. Cole, and asked for something no husband should ever request: a set of fake medical results declaring he had terminal cancer. Ethan needed to know whether the woman he married still loved him, or whether she was simply waiting for the right moment to take everything. Madison stared at the medical report as if it were a winning lottery ticket rather than a life-ending diagnosis. Ethan stood beside her, waiting for the tremble in her voice, the tears, the panic, any sign that she cared. But all he got was silence. Cold, calculating silence. She didn't ask how he felt. She didn't ask about treatment. She didn't even look at him long enough to fake concern. Instead, her eyes stayed glued to the page, scanning every line with a focus that frightened him more than the diagnosis itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was oddly steady. "Oh, I see. Just that. No hug. No shock." As if the news merely confirmed something she had already planned for. Madison walked to the kitchen under the pretense of needing water, but Ethan watched her reflection in the microwave door. Her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was thinking, calculating. He saw it instantly. She pulled out her phone, shielded the screen from him, and began typing rapidly. Not even 2 minutes had passed since she learned her husband was supposedly dying. Ethan followed her quietly down the hallway, hiding by the half-closed door as she entered her office. He heard drawers slide open with urgency. Folders dropped onto the desk. Keys clicked. She wasn't looking up treatment centers or support groups. She was pulling out financial documents, joint accounts, property deeds, insurance files he hadn't seen in years. Madison whispered to herself, reading each line as if she were assembling the final pieces of a puzzle. Her tone wasn't sad or shaken. It was organized, efficient, focused, as though she had been preparing for this moment long before the paper landed in her hands. She flipped through their mortgage papers next, pausing at sections where her signature and his sat side by side. Then she took out a blank transfer of ownership form, the kind Ethan didn't even know they had. She placed it neatly in the center of the desk and stared at it with a look he had never seen on her face before, ambition sharpened by opportunity. When she finally emerged from the room, she forced a sympathetic expression that didn't reach her eyes. She touched Ethan's arm gently, almost mechanically, as if physical affection were a requirement she needed to fulfill. "We'll figure things out," she murmured. But he noticed her gaze flick toward the desk drawer she had left slightly open, revealing a stack of documents she never intended him to see. That night, Madison waited for Ethan to fall asleep before she returned to her office. Ethan, pretending to rest, listened as she made a series of hushed phone calls. He couldn't catch every word, but he recognized phrases: timing, authorization, transfer rights, next steps. Each one struck him harder than the last. By the time dawn crept into the house, Ethan knew. Her reaction hadn't been shock. It had been opportunity. And the woman he married wasn't mourning the idea of losing him. She was preparing for the moment she wouldn't need him at all. The next morning, Madison was awake before Ethan, dressed, hair done, and packing the living room with her phone clutched in her hand. She greeted him with a tight smile that felt more like customer service than concern. He hadn't even poured his coffee before she began her performance. "We need to talk about some paperwork," she said, her voice careful, almost rehearsed. Ethan watched her sit across from him with a folder she'd clearly prepared ahead of time. She slid it toward him, tapping the top page with a manicured nail. It was an updated power of attorney form. Not just medical. Full financial authority. She wanted complete control, immediately. He tried to read her expression, searching for any trace of love or fear or sadness. But all he saw was urgency. A kind of hungry anticipation, like she was waiting for permission to claim a prize. Madison talked fast, as if speed could hide her motives. With your condition, we need to protect our assets. Make sure everything is in order. It's just practical. Ethan said nothing, letting her dig her own grave. She took his silence as agreement and kept pushing. Before lunchtime, she had already called her attorney, not theirs. Ethan overheard her discussing beneficiary updates with a tone that bordered on cheerful. She spoke freely, as if Ethan were already fatting from the world. Words like handover, designation, and sole owner echoed through the hallway. By afternoon, Madison escalated her efforts. She called Ethan's parents, speaking in a trembling voice she hadn't used in front of him. She told them he was emotionally unstable and didn't want visitors. Ethan listened from the stairs as she fabricated an entire story about his mental state. She sounded heartbroken, devastated, the perfect grieving spouse. But the moment she hung up, her face returned to its cold, businesslike calm. Later, she invited Ethan to sit at the dining table, crafting the scene like a negotiation. She placed a pen beside the stack of documents he hadn't agreed to sign. She positioned it carefully, as if the arrangement itself could coerce him. "You don't have to worry about anything," she said softly. "I'll take care of everything. Just sign these so I can handle the responsibilities." That was the moment Ethan broke the silence. He leaned back, folded his hands, and looked her straight in the eyes. "There's something you should know," he said. "The test results, they're not real." Madison froze. Her breath hitched, not with relief but with panic. For the first time since the lie began, emotion flashed across her face, sharp and unfiltered. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out. Ethan felt something inside him shift. He had hoped, in some corner of his heart, that she might break down in relief. That she might cry, or laugh, or collapse into him with gratitude that he wasn't dying. But instead, she remained utterly still, calculating her next move even as the truth shattered everything she'd planned. And in that quiet, brutal second, he saw her clearly. Not as a partner. Not as a wife. But as someone who had already mourned his death, not emotionally, but financially. Madison's stillness lasted only a handful of seconds before it snapped like glass under pressure. Her shock twisted into anger so fast that Ethan barely had time to process the shift. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor with a sharp, violent sound. "You lied to me," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at him. But the tremble wasn't fear. It was rage. Ethan remained calm, far calmer than she expected. He simply nodded and said, "I needed to know the truth." Those words pushed her over the edge. Madison stormed through the house, slamming doors, yanking open drawers, grabbing whatever belonged to her, or whatever she believed she could take. Clothes, jewelry, documents, even random items that had nothing to do with her. She stuffed them into bags with shaking, furious hands. Every movement had the frantic energy of someone whose plan had just detonated in their face. She didn't look at Ethan again. Not once. When she finally left, she didn't say goodbye or offer a final remark. She simply walked out, slamming the front door so hard the frame rattled. Ethan stood in the silence she left behind, feeling the house exhale with him. But Madison wasn't done. Not even close. Hours later, Ethan's phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. Friends, cousins, coworkers, messages pouring in. "Are you okay? Why would you do that to Madison? Did you really fake cancer to torment her?" Confused, Ethan opened social media. There it was. A long, dramatic post written by Madison, crafted with surgical precision to destroy his reputation. She claimed he fabricated a terminal illness to manipulate her emotionally. She wrote about months of psychological abuse. She painted herself as a victim, trapped in a cruel marriage. And people believed her. Because she cried in her selfies. Because she wrote paragraphs dripping with heartbreak. Because she knew exactly how to twist a narrative. But Madison's mistake, the one that would turn everything against her, was that she didn't consider who else was watching. Ethan's lawyer took screenshots of every word. Friends who knew the truth privately reached out, forwarding her older messages, her suspicious comments, her moments of slip-ups. Even Dr. Cole stepped forward to clarify the circumstances behind the fake diagnosis. Those online theatrics, meant to destroy Ethan, instead exposed Madison's contradictions. She posted too quickly after learning the truth. Her story didn't match the timeline. She spoke of events that had never happened. She described conversations Ethan could prove never took place. And she did it all publicly, leaving a trail of digital evidence stronger than any confession. By the end of the night, Ethan wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He simply understood. Madison wasn't trying to defend herself. She was trying to survive the collapse of the scheme she had been building for months. She had failed to secure his assets, failed to get his signature, failed to play the grieving, patient wife long enough to collect what she believed she deserved. So instead, she tried to rewrite the truth. But each lie she posted only dug her deeper. And Ethan, watching quietly, realized he no longer needed to expose her. She was exposing herself perfectly, one public meltdown at a time. The legal process began quietly, almost politely, but the truth did not stay buried for long. When Ethan's attorney presented the screenshots of Madison's posts, the investigators widened their scope. What started as a simple inquiry into a marital dispute quickly spiraled into something far more serious. The first red flag surfaced when the bank provided a report showing multiple unauthorized transfers from the couple's joint account. These weren't small amounts. They were significant withdrawals, spaced strategically over weeks, and always routed through temporary holding accounts before disappearing into Madison's personal fund. Ethan had never noticed because she timed them carefully, always when he was at work, always just below the threshold that would trigger an alert. The second discovery was even worse. Madison had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy on Ethan's name without his consent. The signature on the paperwork was his, but the forensic handwriting expert confirmed it was forged. Sloppy in places. Hastily done. The kind of forgery committed by someone who thought no one would ever check. Investigators then pulled search data from the household devices, and the results chilled everyone in the room. Queries typed at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Questions no loving spouse would ever type casually. How long does morphine overdose take? Symptoms before fatal shock. Life expectancy stage 4 diagnosis timeline. Fastest ways terminal patients decline. Each phrase seemed to carve new cracks in the case. Each search suggested intention, curiosity with a purpose, hunger for an outcome she never admitted aloud. Ethan sat through meeting after meeting, hearing details of his wife's secret life that felt surreal. He learned she had inquired about funeral costs and expedited insurance payouts. He learned she had contacted 2 different financial advisors to ask how soon she could access funds after a spouse's death. She had even spoken with a real estate agent about listing their home, claiming Ethan wasn't going to make it, and she needed to prepare. All before he had ever shown her the fake diagnosis. Her online behavior didn't help her either. Madison continued posting vague accusations, hopping to spin public sympathy in her favor, but instead she gave investigators more material. She changed details, contradicted herself, posted timelines that didn't match the bank records. Every time she tried to defend herself, she exposed another inconsistency. Ethan's attorney gathered everything into a neat, devastating packet. Financial records, forged signatures, search histories, testimony from Dr. Cole, and the messages she had sent to friends hinting she was ready for the next chapter. When confronted, Madison tried to claim she had acted out of panic, grief, confusion. But her actions painted a different picture, one of planning, not panic. Preparation, not confusion. By the time the legal team finished their investigation, the narrative was undeniable. Madison hadn't been a stressed wife dealing with devastating news. She had been working behind the scenes long before any diagnosis existed, setting the stage for a future where Ethan's death would solve every financial inconvenience in her life. And now, with every piece of evidence laid out clearly, the truth was no longer just visible. It was inescapable. The day Madison was formally charged, she didn't walk into the courthouse with confidence or indignation. She walked in looking hollow, as if the weight of her own decisions had finally begun to crush her. Reporters waited outside, shouting questions she pretended not to hear. Ethan only watched from a distance, feeling no triumph, only a quiet sadness for the life they could have had but never did. Inside the courtroom, the evidence unfolded with brutal clarity. The forged signature on the $1 million policy was displayed first. Then came the bank records, showing her weeks of covert transfers. Every document, every time-stamped search, every contradiction in her public posts chipped away at whatever defense she attempted to build. Her attorney tried to argue emotional distress, confusion, fear. But none of that explained why she had been preparing financially for Ethan's death long before the diagnosis ever existed. None of that explained the late-night searches about morphine shock. The insurance company's representative testified next, detailing the investigation they launched the moment they noticed irregularities in Madison's application. The forged consent, the rush for approval, the suspiciously detailed questions she asked about payout timelines and death verification. By the time he finished speaking, the courtroom felt colder. Then came the divorce proceedings, and this time the tone shifted completely. Madison tried to regain control, tried to portray herself as the wronged spouse, but the judge saw straight through her. Her behavior, her calculated actions, her manipulations, her financial interference, had already written the entire story. Ethan didn't need to speak much. His attorney did the work for him, presenting every piece of evidence concisely. Madison's own words, online, became a weapon against her. Screenshots of her posts, where she portrayed Ethan as abusive, backfired the moment she contradicted earlier claims. Each inconsistency weakened her position further. When the judge delivered the ruling, Madison's composure finally cracked. Ethan was granted full ownership of the house. Madison, who had fought so desperately to control every asset, was forced to surrender the very home she once imagined selling after his death. She was ordered to pay the majority of Ethan's legal fees, a sum large enough to drain whatever savings she still held. Her credit card debt, hidden for years, was assigned entirely to her. And in a turn she never anticipated, she was required to pay spousal support to Ethan for 3 years. The inheritance she had tried so fiercely to protect vanished piece by piece. Attorney fees, penalties for insurance fraud, investigative costs. Her bank accounts withered until there was barely anything left. The money that once fueled her entitlement became the tool of her undoing. By the time the sentencing concluded, Madison was no longer the woman who had confidently orchestrated a financial takeover. She was a person staring at the ruins of her own creation, stripped of control, status, and wealth. She looked at Ethan once, just once, as if asking for something unspoken. Forgiveness, understanding, maybe even pity. But Ethan simply turned away. There was nothing left to salvage. Madison had gambled everything on his supposed death. And in losing that gamble, she had lost her entire life. Long after the divorce and criminal case had settled, another storm began to gather, one Madison never saw coming. It started with a quiet phone call to Ethan from her aunt, a woman he had barely spoken to during the marriage. She apologized for the intrusion, then hesitated before revealing that something felt off, about the way Madison had handled her grandmother's estate months earlier. Ethan listened, confused, until the aunt explained that the family had recently reviewed the financial documents tied to the late grandmother's assets. Numbers didn't add up. Accounts had been drained far earlier than expected. Signatures looked unusual, and the only person with consistent access at the time was Madison. Ethan eventually found peace in the quiet moments he once took for granted. He rediscovered routines that had been overshadowed by suspicion and stress, learning to breathe again without waiting for the next betrayal. Therapy helped him untangle the knots Madison had left behind, and slowly, he rebuilt a sense of trust in himself and in the world around him. He surrounded himself with honest people, friends who had stayed by his side when everything collapsed. For the first time in years, he felt the comfort of living without fear or manipulation. Madison, meanwhile, slipped into a life defined by consequences she could no longer outrun. Her attempts to regain stability failed repeatedly, each rejection reminding her of the choices that had led her there. The world she had once tried to control now existed beyond her reach, leaving her isolated in the ruins of her own ambition. In the end, their lives became mirrors of the values they lived by. Ethan grew stronger, steadier, and more grounded. Madison faded into the shadows of the mistakes she refused to face. And the lesson lingered in Ethan's mind with quiet certainty. When someone cares more about your insurance policy than your heartbeat, it's time to walk away long before they push you to the edge.